Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing another really interesting guest today with an extremely interesting story and some topics that we don't normally get into the show. But today we have the honor of being joined by Warren Roberts. Warren is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of a group called Living Legacy Forest. They are an innovative profit-for-purpose company and a leader in the area of so-called green memorialization, reforestation. They are focused on creating urban memorial forests by turning human and pet ashes into trees and other living memorial forests instead of cemeteries, ultimately with the goal of reforesting the planet. With the Living Legacy treatment protocols, their company is focused on returning human and animal remains to the earth without causing the various harms to the ecosystem, and as human ashes, as we'll find out, have pH similar to oven cleaner and contain somewhere between 200 to 2,000 times the normal amount of salts that are used to fertilize trees and other plants. These various processes ultimately detoxify ashes so they're not harmful to soil and tree health. Living Legacy Forest was founded in Melbourne, Australia. They've successfully created 3 of these dedicated living memorial forests in the suburbs of Altona, Lillydale, and Fawkner. Warren started his career with an undergraduate degree in business with a focus on property from RMIT University, and he spent a lot of time in the area of land acquisition, property valuations, and so forth, but then got into this and really interested in hearing the story. So honored to have him. Warren Roberts, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
G'day, thanks for having me, and great introduction. You're pretty well researched and thorough.
Yeah, no, it's I'm always interested in hearing our guests' backgrounds, and you know, I'd love to hear a little more of the details from you, and the story of how you're out there doing property valuation and various transactions. What got you interested in this space to begin with? Love to hear the background story.
Good question. So I guess, when I was a kid, to me, what fascinated me was the simple idea that you could imagine something and make it real. And, as a kid, that was the most exciting thing in the world, that someone could imagine something and it could become real. And that's how I was fascinated with the world. And that's what brought me to life. And growing up as a kid, I got to become almost graduating school, and I thought, well, how can I imagine things and make them real in the world? And my version of that was property development. I just thought I had a different perspective. A lot of people that get into property development, they want to make money, or they like engineering or something. And I was just like, I was fascinated by the idea that you could imagine a building and it could become real. And that fascination with imagining something and making it real was just exhilarating. And so eventually I became a property valuer with the sole purpose of becoming a property developer, so that I could create what I imagined in my mind and make it real. And I was eventually became good at it, and I was developing housing estates and buying farms and turning them into hundreds of homes. But I felt dead inside, and And then one day, like, this eagle landed in front of my car after I bought this farm. This eagle landed in front of me. It was the first time I realized that, I was taking something's habitat away. And even though I thought I was creating something, and I was also destroying something, and that wasn't aligned with my heart and my vision about how I wanted to create in the world. And I guess something inside of me just said, you know what, why don't I use this ability to imagine things and make it real to create what I really wanted to create in the world and create these amazing forests. And I guess this is just an extension of me creating the most beautiful things I can imagine in my mind and making them real. And so that's the sort of the way, the thing that drives me and my modus operandi. But I guess somewhere along the lines of being a property valuer and developer, my best friend at university, she died. And when she died, I didn't know how to deal with grief. As a young man, people asked me at a funeral, how are you going, Warren? And I thought I was going well because I didn't cry. And I dealt with grief by avoiding feelings, and I just cut off from my feelings. And then I didn't have to feel them. And it worked really well for the first year. But after a few years, the truth was I became very numb, and my colorful, interesting and exciting world became gray and numb and lifeless. And I was sort of like, it's like having a keyboard. Avoiding feeling is like having a keyboard and only playing one note. And, the longer you play that one note, the worse it gets. And that's kind of what I was doing. I was this young man trying to play a symphony with one note. And the longer it got drawn out, the more depressed I became. And one day I went for a walk in the gardens and I started looking at flowers. And every time I looked at a flower, I started to get my feelings back because I was letting myself feel. Looking at flowers feels good.
Yeah.
And then every time I let myself feel, I was getting another note on the keyboard back. And I spent 10,000 hours just looking at flowers one year and getting all the keys on my piano back and getting my feelings back. And then one day I felt the note that I'd been avoiding, the dark, heavy note at the bottom of the keyboard, which was the grief. And I just wept and I cried. And the amazing thing was the thing that I'd been avoiding, this grief, I felt more alive when I was crying than I ever had in my whole life before. And the truth is the grief had given me a bigger piano than I had before. I probably had a piano this big before I had grief. And then it got smaller. But when I allowed myself to experience grief in its fullness, I had a big keyboard with notes I'd never imagined before. And I felt more alive than I ever had before as a consequence of loving someone and losing them and feeling it fully. And in that moment of feeling more alive than I had ever before and being in nature and looking at flowers, that's where I had the idea. And I thought, wow, imagine if people could become trees when they die. And instead of people connecting to what they lost and experiencing numbness and depression and grief like I had, they could connect to the beauty that person's life created. And they could experience life with a greater appreciation for being alive, a greater appreciation for the people that are still alive with them. And as a consequence of loving someone, live life more fully. And from that day, the first thing I did, I ran home and I looked my dad in the eyes and I said, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. And I just told him how many times I loved him because I never looked him in his eyes and told him how much I loved him, and I just realized how precious that was, that I still had that. And I still had people in my life that I could tell them I loved them because I missed out on that opportunity with my friend. I never got to tell her how much of a friend she was and what she meant to me. And that's what my grief was. It was the inability to tell someone what they meant to them when they were alive. And it happens all the time.
Sure.
It happens all the time. But, I don't think the purpose of loving people is to cause grief, heartache, and numbness. And I chose to commit the rest of my life to creating a purpose of love that creates gratitude, a greater appreciation for being alive, and a greater capacity to live. And that's at the heart of living legacy, is that we turn people's ashes into trees and flowers to change the connection point so that people connect to the beauty that people's lives created instead of what was lost. And so instead of looking at a grave and going, I lost them, it's bad and sad, you look at a flower and their life created the flower. You know, it's like you can't be depressed or numb and be in a state of gratitude or beauty or adoration of a flower. The adoration wins. Right. And so it can change what grief is and what it means, and it can change the purpose and the meaning of all of our existence. And I don't think the purpose of love is to cause grief. I think it's the purpose is to cause gratitude. And I don't think the purpose of the human race existing is for us to bury the planet with graveyards. And that's what we've done. The average city has a cemetery footprint twice the size of its CBD. So what city do you live in?
We're here on the East Coast in Philadelphia, but yeah, it's.
I guarantee you, if you take the Philadelphia CBD and you take all of the cemeteries in the greater area and you take their total area, it'll be more than double the size of the CBD. And that's generally the same for every city in the world. And we've done that in 100 years. And now we've got 8 billion people. Now all the cemeteries are full. We've got 8 billion people. And we go, what, are we just going to bury the planet? Or we can reforest it, you know? And that's the exciting opportunities that we get to change the way we leave the world as a nation, as a planet. And it's not some crazy idea that's out of our reach. It's something that, you know, at least in Australia, we've created some of the most beautiful forests in the world from scratch. And, you know, we'll be doing it overseas soon. So it's exciting and it's real.
Yeah, it's interesting because before I hopped on this call, you know, I did a little research and, you know, just looking at the United States numbers here, I was a little surprised. You know, we bury about 33% of folks. The cremation number is around 60, and then there's this other category for, you know, people that donate their bodies to research and all that. But you know, when we look at burial and cremation, and you point a lot of this out in your materials, clearly, as what some of these facts I mentioned in the intro in terms of cremation, very high pH levels, you know, off the levels in terms of salt. I mean, it's not as simple as, okay, here's some ashes and we're going to fertilize some trees. And there's a process, and I'd love for you to take us into the process. But at the same time, you know, burial is equally between the materials that coffins are made of and embalming materials and everything that goes in that process as well. We're pretty toxic in the sense of what happens after we die. Take us into that, because we lose, I think the number is something like around 70 million people a year.
Yeah.
Big numbers. And there's just, you know, drill down a little bit on the sort of what we represent in terms of that.
I'll drill down into soil science, but it's kind of like, you know, but it's also ultimately about like, what's the purpose of the soil science? And it's like, how did we become a culture where we see nature as being separate from us? A culture where we can desecrate the sacred, a culture where we can chop down trees, animals, habitat, and wildlife to create coffins and clear space for graveyards as a way to honor life. Yeah. You know, it's like, hang on, what you're honoring life by chopping down animals' home? You know what I mean? It's like you're honoring life by chopping down the trees that create the air we breathe. It's like, it's just, you know, like, to do it. My ancestors were buried. Like, fine, we had a need to honor people's lives, but it's just coming to a point where it's incongruent, you know, and it's just like, well, you can't really honor life and bury the planet. You know, there's a bit of a problem there. And when people realize the extent to which we are burying the planet, you know, like the statistic in the New York Times did a publication on it, and it's like a typical cemetery uses more embalming fluid than an Olympic-sized swimming pool, more steel than the Eiffel Tower, you know, and it's not just the trees that they clear and to make coffins and to clear space. It's, you know, all the stuff that goes into the soil. And, you know, and then it creates this thing where in the past, we would see nature as being a part of us, and we'd see our ancestors being a part of us, and now we see it as being separate from us, and we don't treat it as sacred anymore. And so, I guess the reality is the majority of the world is now cremated, and so primarily we're focusing on turning cremated ashes, which are toxic, into a nutrient form. Mm-hmm. And so a typical person's cremated ashes weigh 3 kilograms. They have the same pH as bleach and oven cleaner, which is 12 out of 14. The pH scale is logarithmic to the power of 10, and most plants need a pH of about 6. So that's almost 1 million times too high for most plants. It's not a little bit toxic. It's like out of the ballpark, ridiculously toxic. A 3 kilogram set of ashes also contains around 1.5 cups of salt, devastating to photosynthesis. So, people often go to a beautiful place in nature to scatter their ashes, but it's beautiful because the ecosystem's healthy. And so if you go and then you degrade that ecosystem, it's out of kilter, right? And so like there's been 2 studies. One study showed that 90% of ashes planted in untreated ashes died within 21 days. Another study showed plants planted with cigarette butts showed a 20% decrease in growth over a 2-month period. There's ashes are way worse for plants and soil health than cigarette butts. If you wouldn't scatter 3 kilograms of cigarette butts in nature, you probably shouldn't be doing with ashes, because they don't contain all the salt and the high pH. They really are catastrophic for ecosystems. But the reality is, you've got some large organizations, which I won't name, they're scattering ashes in, natural ecosystems. And yes, you can throw cigarette butts in the forest, and the forest will survive the cigarette butts, and you can scatter ashes in there too, but you're not contributing to the ecosystem. You're not living on through nature. You're not changing the way we leave the world, and you're certainly not part of a community that's creating, some of the most beautiful forests in the world. Mm-hmm. So it's a special formula that uses fundamentally microbes to digest the cremated remains and convert it into into nutrients like nitrogen and potassium that can actually become the tree and help it grow. Each night trees sweat a clear liquid called exudate. That exudate communicates to the microbes in the soil what it needs to grow, and the microbes read that liquid, and then based on what the tree is telling them, it can convert the organic material around it into what it needs and then feed it. And if it's ashes, that's what it converts. So you become part of an intelligent exchange. Yeah. It's amazing, and it actually changes the electrical conductivity in the soil. There's more electricity in the soil as a result of the process. And so, as a result, we're the first company in the world to create new forests at scale, new master plan forests at scale from cremated remains. And it changed the way we leave the world.
And as I mentioned in the so you're in Melbourne, or you founded the organization in Melbourne, but you have these 3 collaborations in Altona, Lillydale, and Fawkner, which and again, I've never been to Australia, but I took a look at the map, and so you have a nice distribution there around the city. Talk a little bit about what went into putting these together. Obviously, the choice of you have to have partners that are have some experience in this, but at the same time, what was the collaboration like? And then ultimately, if you could take us a little into the process of what happens, everything from pre-planning a so-called tree burial through ultimately the ceremony that happens and so forth. That'd be great to understand how this currently
I think so. It's well, we've grown a lot more since then. So we started off with Altona, Lillydale, and Fawkner. Now we've got a massive 40-hectare conservation forest in Western Australia. Okay. We purchased a golf course in Melbourne, and we converted an entire golf course into a master plan botanic forest of ridiculously beautiful magnitude. And we're about to launch 2 new sites in New South Wales, Sydney as well. So we started with the government because we just thought it was really important to validate the science. We didn't want people to be able to, there's so many internet gimmicks and rubbish out there. We wanted to make it absolutely clear that that the science was indisputable. So we partnered with the multi-billion-dollar government cemetery trusts in Australia. We had to go through a strenuous testing period. We killed hundreds of trees to in the process of proving it, making sure it worked. But after a few years, eventually we got through that. And so the government was our first partner, and they started putting our trees in cemeteries as as a way to shift the perception of cemeteries and start creating a new solution. We've still got some new cemetery partners. We've just recently launched a new partnership in Adelaide in South Australia as well, and with Centennial Park. And but then after the cemeteries, we just got people saying, "I want a tree in a forest. I want a tree in a forest." And so we were lucky enough. We had the guy Bruce Jeffries and Layla Jeffries. They donated a beautiful jarrah forest in Western Australia. Jarrah trees they're the giants of Australia. They grow to like 40 meters tall. They're beautiful big native trees, and so we created a conservation covenant on that forest, and that was our first forest. So we planted these native trees to create habitat for endangered species. So in Australia, we've got this cute little animal called the quokka. I mean, Australia's got we've got crazy animals here. That's our best thing. Poisonous animals and beautiful animals, but the quokka is one of possibly the cutest animal in the world, and the other one's the black cockatoo. And so what the community's done there is remarkable. They have people have become, instead of chopping down trees to create coffins, people have become trees and created a conservation forest that has brought back habitat for 2 endangered species that literally did not exist there. Wow. Which is amazing. It's amazing. We're literally reversing the ecosystem and reversing the trend. And it's a beautiful forest. It's a grassroots phenomenon. That was our first forest, and that made us realize, just how much people wanted to leave a legacy and be part of creating these forests. And then from that one, we saw this golf course for sale, and that gave us this ability just to really create the highest level of a vision that was possible. We've got 1,000 cherry blossom trees on one fairway. You walk through thousands of flowering cherry blossoms. Like, the experience that people have when they go there is of phenomenal beauty. And you're walking through 1,000 cherry blossoms, you get to your parents' tree, and you're in this beautiful experience surrounded by flowers, and your life goes on to create a beautiful experience for other people, a profoundly beautiful experience, and a great appreciation of time and the gift of being alive. And so we created this beautiful forest like that, and that was our second one. And now, and now we're launching these other ones in New South Wales, and I mean, I couldn't ask for more. I get to imagine these forests into my mind. I get to make them real, and then I get to walk through these forests with people that are going to become these trees. And sometimes it's confronting because I guess I'm planting trees with people that I know I will have them in my hands as ashes one day, and there's just a brevity to it all. There's a weight and a seriousness, but I appreciate everyone's sort of faith and belief in what we're doing, and it's quite an honor.
Yeah. One of the pieces of material I read, talked about how, you have these special agreements, so the gardens are, of course, protected, in perpetuity. And again, as you're explaining, and we're taking something living that dies and converting it now into something new that's living. Contingencies in terms of obviously we plan these in areas where most likely won't be a lot of natural disasters, but diseases, pests, things of that nature. talk a little bit about what goes into that thinking as you plan for, site 11, 12, and 13 and so forth down the line.
Yeah, it's super complicated. On one side you've got the risk of floods, and on the other side you've got the risk of fire. And then in the middle you've got pests, which is just a constant issue. And pests in one level is just, you get fungal issues, and at the microscopic level, and at the larger level you've got birds eating all your flowers, and rabbits and kangaroos and bugs, So somewhere between flood and famine and fire and pests, and there's plenty of threats, and you can have all the right conditions, and you're still going to lose a few trees. So you can plant 100 trees, you're going to lose a few. But essentially, you have to have very good governance. And we've made so many mistakes over the last 10 years to round off and learn how to be, I guess, competent in this space. That's there's a lot that can go wrong, and it will go wrong over a long period of time. Everything will go wrong. So we like at the one place we've got 3 kilometers of automated sprinklers. We can press a button, and the whole place is just flooded with water. We avoid sites that are surrounded by bushland, which is a fire risk.
Sure.
So we look at adjoining uses and fire risk. We look at water's obviously very critical. We look at how water flows through during floods. There's a never-ending barrage of environmental challenges. And then you've got environmental, and then you've got, not, I won't say climate change, but then you've just got, the temperatures changing and volatility and things like that.
Got it.
Comes with its own suite of challenges,
Yeah, as everything. But no, again, it's good you're thinking about all the contingencies that come with this. Again, going back to that United States data that I was looking at before, as I mentioned, here in the States, we're about 60% cremation currently. But, a lot of the countries over in your neck of the woods, Japan is near 100%, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Nepal, South Korea, all in the high 90s. Talk about plans beyond Australia. I mean, clearly you have a lot of space in Australia, but what happens after Australia?
Well, I mean, like Australia is a tiny population, so
sure.
25 million people, So there are much more populated areas that have a more severe cemetery crisis issue, and they have a much higher cremation rate, and I guess also a closer relationship to nature. Like Australians don't necessarily have a divine natural connection to nature. So sometimes we have to foster that, but it's I'm very much looking forward to expanding our branches into USA, Asia, and Europe. Pretty soon, I'd say sometime next year, we'll be starting to reach into those new territories. And sometimes we'll be doing it to support conservation outcomes, and sometimes we'll be just doing it to create ridiculously beautiful forests in cities. But ultimately, it's always going to be contributing to solving the problem that these cities have run out of cemetery space. And the baby boomer generation is the first generation in most cities where the majority of people won't have the right to be remembered in their own city anymore. For all the other generations, the majority of them will be remembered in this city. There's going to be, in their community, there will be something that says that they existed. And this is the first time a whole generation generally won't be remembered because the majority of people aren't being memorialized anymore. And it's never been like this before. This is the first time we've crossed into this epoch where the majority of people aren't being memorialized. And I don't think it's because they don't want to be remembered or they don't care about how they're remembered. I think it's the current options don't resonate with them anymore, and they don't want to be remembered with a tombstone in a graveyard. They don't want to be remembered with grief and loss, and that's fair enough. I think people want to be remembered by, how they touch the world, and people that created lots of adventures want to be remembered by all the adventures they created. And funny people hope people are still telling their jokes, and like people leave a legacy that lives on in people well after they die.
Right.
If they really do, they live on in people, and that's their spirit. People use the word spirit all the time, and it's like this weird ambiguous term, but an adventurous person it's an adventurous spirit. At Christmas time, if you're giving, it's a giving spirit, right?
Right.
And if you're not, you're mean spirited. So there's an essence of this word spirited, which really represents,
Right.
how we lived in this world and how it touched others.
Yep.
And that spirit lives on in people after we're gone.
Yep.
And, I think that's the thing that we're acknowledging here is people's spirit and how it lived on. But I'm trying to say in the most grounded way possible, without it just being some ambiguous term, that it's like, no, that's their person's spirit. They were adventurous, they were humorous, they were giving. And that still lives on in us, my dad had my dad has a hardworking spirit, and that lives on in me, and he's got a great attitude towards working and being grateful for working, and that lives on in me, and all of his children, and to acknowledge a person and acknowledge a spirit, the spirit of a person, I think it's super important. I don't think it's something that should be lost to a whole generation.
Yeah. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
It's a funny conversation. That conversation, I don't think anyone's had it. I don't think anyone else has realized that baby boomers are the first generation that don't have a place, that the majority of a generation aren't going to be remembered. And it's a new thing that people aren't aware of.
Interesting little piece that buzzed in my mind when you talked about sort of the fact that we're in this weird new generation where there's been a lack of interest in memorializing people, and sort of just an interesting little side note that it got me thinking, maybe will there be a movement like this, or you're sort of reconnecting or re-stimulating a type of movement that, again, it might sound some morose to some people, but nonetheless, these epitaphs and memorials and other, new ways, again, that you're thinking about the future here. I think there's an interesting sort of, wave coming, let's say.
There is. It's funny though, because we're working with a lot of cemeteries, and I want to help them become more relevant again.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the cemeteries we're working with at the moment, our goal is to make those cemeteries the most beautiful place in the community several times a year. And these cemeteries, they've run out of space, so they think they've run out of revenue, and then the graves decay and it gets old, and then people hold their breath when they go past, because the idea of it is grey and negative.
Yeah.
But the cemeteries we're working with, we're going, hang on, there's actually millions of dollars worth of revenue through of trees and flowers that we can recreate that you thought you didn't have, and by recreating new types of revenue, we can make these places beautiful and then bring people back to seeing these places, our heritage, our ancestors, and our history, and and come full circle. It's sort of like, it's not, sometimes it comes across that I'm sort of bagging out cemeteries. It's just, but I'm also kind of just also acknowledging just the trend and this,
Right.
and the economic realities of an asset that runs out of space and then runs out of revenue. And what do you do? Where you can go to a forest that's 10,000 years old and no one's looking after it, and it looks amazing.
Right.
So the fundamentals of our economic system are correct. And if we're going to say we're going to create something that's going to be around for millions of years, we can do that with an ecosystem. It's very hard to do that with a few hectares of concrete.
Right. Warren, what's the story with regard to pets? because I know that you also involved in pets. Any interesting? I mean, are pets similar to us in terms of, some of the
Exactly the same.
pH and salt and toxicities? Tell us about
Identical.
what's. Yeah. Okay.
Or, look, almost identical. The cremation structure is very similar. I mean, obviously, fishes are different. Obviously a fish is not the same, but generally mammal cremation bones are the same. I think in most countries there's 7 times more pet cremations than people, so it's also important and relevant. And it's in Australia, a lot of cemeteries have banned pets, so you're not even allowed to have your pet in your grave. And if a lot of people don't have children, then their pet is their family, and so the cemeteries are making it even harder for people to want to be a part of them, because then you can't have pets. But I guess they don't really mind because they've run out of space. So they don't really mind if people don't want to go to cemeteries because they've got no space anyway. So it's a multi-pronged problem. But once again, the simple principle is just like, well, we have all these beloved pets in our lives, and just like, what if these pets can create these beautiful parks and gardens, and we can all contribute to creating a more beautiful world? Isn't that the purpose of life?
Yeah.
Isn't the purpose of life? The purpose of death in an ecosystem is regeneration and to create more life. And when you separate that, when you take ourselves out of the ecosystems, you separate humans from nature, and you get this fracture, which is what you have. But when you make our death a part of the ecosystem again, then it has purpose. And that purpose is regeneration. And the problem is we've lost our purpose. What's humanity's purpose as a whole? You know?
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying, well, I don't know the purpose of life, but I know the purpose of death is regeneration. That is the purpose of death in nature. It's a it's a it's a powerful force of regeneration, and without death in nature, you don't get regeneration, right? Every leaf that falls on the ground is regeneration. Every mushroom that spores, every animal's body that goes to it, it's all regeneration. And so we're supposed to be part of the circle of life. So don't know what the purpose of life is, but I know what the purpose of death is. And I know if we do that right, then we have purpose back in the ecosystem again. And yeah, I think it would be amazing for all the pets to create beautiful forests and gardens. And I guess they are with us, but obviously I'd like to see more of it.
Right. Right. Well, I have a parrot. He's going to outlive me, but well, we'll see. We'll see where that all goes.
How long do parrots live?
Go 30. Well, it depends how big they are. Some live up to 70 years. So th this one upstairs, he'll probably outlive me. He's
Yeah,
got 30 some. Well, no, fingers crossed. Maybe we'll
yeah.
go at the same time. Who knows where science is headed? But um, what's coming up that we else that we should know about? I mean, you're expanding nicely. Obviously, you're getting these forests going. Hopefully, the international expansion. What else should we be on the lookout for in terms of
Yeah.
you, in terms of living legacy, in terms of anything other initiatives that I might have missed, please?
Well, look, I mean, you'll see there's human composting is a concept that's emerging, and it's been legalized in a few states in America. I think the mafia's been doing it for half a century, but it seems to be trending. I don't know. It's my answer to that is like, if human bodies have been biodegrading on the planet for 8 billion years, you know why are they trying to invent machines or a contraption to do it? To do it, like, if you can put a body in the ground and it biodegrades and that's how the planet works, why are they trying to use a machine to do it? Cool. But nevertheless, people are asking about it. We've got a machine that we invented a machine that can do it. We'll look at offering that in our suite of offerings as part of the mechanism, as well. but I just personally think, natural burial. I think natural burial is great. I think that's how the planet's been working for 8 billion years. But the problem with natural burial and with human composting is it's just the legalities are very much more complicated.
Right.
Most cities developed a legal framework as a consequence of people dying from infectious disease,
Yeah.
and that infectious disease going into the water table and killing the living. And so, as a reaction to, whether it's the plague or cholera or all of that, they said, all right, well, we've got to have regulations around how people are buried, and they're correct, especially seeing as infectious diseases are evolving.
Yeah.
And, and so the reality is that's kind of like, the legislation around burial is different but once people are cremated, the infectious disease risk is gone. And so the legal framework is somewhat different there, but then the environmental framework is, a different set of challenges. So
Got it. Well, it's
yeah,
again, it's an interesting story. It's a very elegant way you look at it, elegant processes that you put together, and I look forward to seeing how these forests continue to evolve and how the business grows. But it's a very impressive story, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us.
okay.
Again, for everybody that is going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks or who will be joining on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Warren Roberts, Chief Executive Officer and founder, Living Legacy Forest. We'll put the link to their website in show notes. But again, Warren, I want to thank you for taking the time out to talk to us today. It's the weekend there, but it's a really great story. And again, wishing you the best with all of it as you continue to grow it.
Thank you. Can I ask you a couple of questions?
Certainly.
When is your birthday?
October 29th.
What season is that where you live?
Well, it's autumn.
Autumn. So your birth tree might be a ginkgo or a maple or a Japanese maple, maple. So, like some people like to choose a tree that flowers on their birthday, so that when family members visit them on their birthday, because that's generally what happens, their tree is in season, and it's connected to it's personal, right? But other people like to choose a tree that they're just they're in love with or has a particular significance. It was the tree in their backyard at the home where they grew up. Is there a tree that you've fallen in love with, or a tree that you love? If you could be any tree in the world, what tree would you be?
Well, ginkgo is interesting because they live a long time, don't? I mean, they're normally very hardy,
Hundreds of
but
years.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the only other, I mean, I live in Center City, Philadelphia, so I mean, it's a pretty green city compared to others, but there's really nice Japanese maple right outside. That's kind of cool.
Stunning.
Yeah, it's always attracted
Stunning.
birds and squirrels and all sorts of wildlife. We planted that about 20 years ago, and it's it's huge
Yeah.
now.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah. Wow. That's a good size tree.
yeah,
I mean, and that's the thing. So, like, you planted that tree pretty much at the start of your first children, and
exactly.
that would have been the whole part of the family grew up seeing this tree grow was a part of the family's life, and
Yeah,
now the tree's an adult and the kids are an adult, and yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the magic of it, right? Like
yeah,
I planted my tree with my children, and the day that I die is probably the day that I wish I could be there for my children the most. And like at least I know that the tree that we all planted together will be there for them. It's like
yeah,
it's not much, but it's I'm glad there will be something.
absolutely.
Something. Something guiding them, something positive. You know.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Again, a beautiful story. A really beautiful
Yeah.
story. And